All right, everyone. Dianne Feinstein is not planning to run for re-election in the Senate. Of course, she had a prospective primary challenger already bellying up to the bar and declaring before Feinstein made this decision, and that was really a breach of decorum at the time. Can't remember the name. Some generic leftoid from the state was going to primary her. I have a feeling, by the way, that might have something to do with why Dianne Feinstein decided to stand down. She's old. She's known to probably have dementia. She's not really capable at her age. She's almost 90 years old. With her mental state being as it is, she's not capable of fending off a primary challenge. She'd have to skip debates. She'd have to do the mean girl thing and say, well, I'm not going to bother campaigning. I've got a job to do. That doesn't always work, no matter how long-standing an incumbent you are. This makes the 24 election massively more important. Let me explain why. There is exactly one reason why the Joe Biden administration in its first couple of years wasn't capable of ramming through literally everything that Ilhan Omar wanted, and that's the Senate filibuster. There aren't that many Democrats that swore that they would uphold the filibuster. You had Joe Manchin, who's facing stiff opposition. He took a hit because at the last minute he decided to work with Chuck Schumer, parse a little bit out of the infrastructure bill and pass it, and he happens to be in West Virginia. He's being punished by his constituents for that. You've got Kyrsten Sinema, who is also embattled. She's facing a primary challenge as well. She may not be reelected to the position. And then you had Dianne Feinstein. She was one of the Democrats who came out and said, no, I don't see a reason to get rid of the Senate filibuster. That rule should remain. For all of her faults, and there are many of them, hanging on to your position despite knowing that you're in ill mental health, and she is, if you've watched a speech from the last 3 or 4 years, you'll know this, desperately anti-gun, desperately anti-First Amendment. I remember talking about this many years ago. I had a video on the topic. Nobody else probably remembers this. Do you recall, maybe one or two of you are fortunate enough to have been following me that long and still do, that time when Dianne Feinstein, in her own testimony, in her own Senate statements, was weighing in on the internet and free speech thereon, and explicitly stated that she didn't think that bloggers and content creators were protected by the First Amendment's right to free press because they're not members of the journalism community. So if you do independent journalism, Dianne Feinstein says you should be able to be censored and it doesn't violate your First Amendment rights. We have a laundry list of issues with Dianne Feinstein. I am not going to simp for her. But if I can give her credit for one thing, I realize it's just like, hey, this is the diamond in the rough. This is the little sparkling gem. This is the one undigested bit of corn that's still edible to certain creatures that was sitting in a 10-gallon jug of shit. She did defend the filibuster and refused to back down on that issue. Partially because she realized, hey, if there's a Senate filibuster, it requires more negotiation, and then I potentially have more leverage. A lot of people in both parties simply vote party line. When you have that margin, though, you can get a little bit of what you want. This is also why Manchin and Sinema and a few others defend the filibuster. Normally, the party that controls the Senate wants to get rid of it. The Republicans have been dumb enough to talk about this too, and the out party wants to defend it. But you have to have a margin within the other party large enough to prevent a vote that would remove this filibuster. The Dems right now don't have the votes to do that. And come 24, I would be really, really surprised if the Senate doesn't flip to the GOP. Based on the Senate map, I realize it'll mostly be unipartyists like Mitt Romney or John Cornyn, sellouts and people like that. It won't be necessarily principled MAGA unless the political winds shift further. But at the very least, in the partisan sense, it wouldn't really make sense for them to go after the filibuster, especially when you potentially have a Democratic administration. Which is possible. I think that Trump will probably win the Republican primaries. It depends on who he goes up against, how credible the honkening would have to be in order to prevent him from that Grover Cleveland comeback kid position. And I hope that he does get it, by the way. And then it doesn't matter what happens with the Senate other than stymieing some of his agenda, but the uniparty Republicans will gladly work with the neoliberals to help to obstruct a Trump administration 2.0. Why do we know this? Well, we've seen it before, and most of the people in the Senate and Congress are the same. They're the same people as before. Anyway, we already know that what they will do. Feinstein here, again, she's almost 90. the writing was on the wall that she was unlikely to seek re-election. I think the biggest part of this, though, the biggest import, is that now you're minus one senator who will be principled, I hate to use that term when I'm talking about Feinstein of all people, principled in their upholding of the filibuster as a Senate rule. By the way, could you use the filibuster to defend the filibuster? I'm not sure if they have to have a larger majority threshold to undo the rule, like a 10-vote majority. I'm actually not sure about that, or if they can change it with a simple majority, which they don't have because, of course, Manchin, Sinema, and Feinstein are there, which means you have maybe 48 votes in favor of removing it. They won't even bother bringing it to the floor because they know that it'll fail and it'll look like usurpation and people wouldn't like it and that they would take their lumps politically. Chuck Schumer will be sad, though. At the end of the day, even if he wants to get rid of the filibuster to reign like a little oligarch or something like that, I think he does like Feinstein because they agree so much on free speech bad, guns bad, the militias evil, evil magats, oh my god, they're so violent and stuff like that. They must have some coke together once in a while. I bet they fucking do. They get it from Mitch McConnell's yacht, allegedly. Yeah, now that story never got any closure, now did it? Nobody ever faced any significant questions about why a massively felonious amount of hard drugs were found on the private yacht of a major Senate figure. Never going to get any answers either. So Feinstein's leaving. She won't seek re-election. That seat will then be filled presumptively by someone even to the left of her. It'll be a woke leftist. The person who jumped into the race is more like an Elon Omar than a standard yesteryear Democrat neoliberal. Probably will win. And of course, in California, in a rather safely blue state, probably will win the Senate seat. So you can count on one less person in the Senate defending the filibuster, which means that more work needs to be done to make sure that the people that are elected to the Senate will uphold it. Otherwise, when that finally dies at some point, I hope it's not in my lifetime, all political hell breaks loose because the final vestige of the Senate not being a directly democratic edifice will go bye-bye. It will simply be a rubber stamp for a partisan ideology. And that's problematic. We already have that in the House, and it causes enough problems with the negotiation. To the Democrats out there, do you really want the Senate to act more like the House of Representatives typically does? Because that appears to be what you want. I'm not sure how wise an idea that is. That's about all. Peace out.